Your binders that you all have copies of, and I think there's one on the public table, is the budget that I am recommending that the board adopt. I will not be insulted or surprised if it is changed today before its adoption.
You won't be offended either.
Or offended. If you'd like, Mr. Chairman, I'll go through in a little bit of detail the budget. Usually Morgan can provide further detail, and then I would suggest we entertain questions, and maybe if we do so by department, or if there are multiple individuals interested. So the budget includes.
Real quick, where does this go?
Behind your summary sheet in your binder.
If you'd been on time, you wouldn't have had to ask that.
I was on time. I was just busy.
So to begin, the process, as the board members that are on the budget committee are well aware, we solicited budget requests from departments early this year, April and May, and received those. Those requests totaled expenditures of $116,974,000 or $974,000 and some change, with corresponding projected revenue of $96,456,000. Through the budget committee process and recommended changes that I have recommended today, we have changed that to include projected revenues of $102,919,000 with expenditures of $116,215,000. So obviously the expenditures exceed revenues. That's for a variety of reasons, and I'll try to highlight those a little bit. Several $million of that is capital items that were in fund balances at the beginning of the year that we expect to spend during this year. Most notably, there's $1.1 million in there for a swimming pool. There's $1.3 million in there for the acquisition of 2950 Riverside. There are multiple public works and road projects totaling several $1 million also in there that would indicate the deficit, but in reality they're capital expenditures.
Ballpark on those several.
Why don't we just go to that?
I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's...
Keep going, then we can come back.
Okay, well, if you don't mind, we'll come back and go to the road budget. The recommended budget includes salary increases for all employees, except the board, of 2.5%, and an increase in flexible benefits for all employees of $100 a month. Now, some of those increases have been implemented pursuant to negotiated bargaining agreements with units. Other units have not yet entered into agreements, and so the monies are budgeted but are not currently being expended. Other notable issues, I included a vacancy factor equal to approximately 4% of salaries in the general fund, public safety, and probation funds. Now, I think that's a fairly conservative figure, and I base that on the last 3 years' average, which indicates about a 9% actual vacancy savings from budgeted versus actual expenditures. So I think taking a little less than half of that is a relatively conservative approach. Now, having said that, if all the positions were filled in all the departments, that would lead to a problem. I don't expect that to be the case, and I think we'll review that at mid-year to find out. That totals approximately $730,000, which included as a vacancy savings. There will also be, I think, a similar vacancy savings in other funds. In road department, to a much lesser extent, we don't seem to have vacancies there, but also in the health and human services budgets, we did not include a vacancy factor, but I would anticipate a similar vacancy factor in those budget units.
Richard,
Yes.
what we're talking about, that in that one paragraph, you have the full-time employees an increase or decrease. In the middle of that there, you have a couple of them that don't say that they're an increase or decrease. Can you just go through that real quick?
You're in the allocated position schedule paragraph?
Vacancy factor paragraph, the second
Okay.
paragraph under vacancy. So like you have 1.5 full-time equivalents in tobacco, education, control. Is that an increase or decrease?
I'm not sure I'm following.
They're all increases unless they're,
1, 2,
say,
3, 4.
decrease. They're all increases except for the ones that say a decrease.
Okay.
Oh, okay, you're on the next.
He's on page 2.
Yeah, okay, you're on the next paragraph.
Page 2,
Yeah, the next, the whole,
second paragraph, vacancy factor.
Right, okay. So, and this is, I'm sorry, there isn't a heading on there, but this is dealing with the allocated position schedule. And the positions are increased over last year's budget. So if you'll follow along with me, we've got 2 FTE increase in Public Works included in the budget, 1 FTE in Planning and Building Department, and I'll discuss this a little bit more. This deals with the transition of economic development from planning and building to health and social services. 0.3 increase in the district attorney's office, 1 FTE increase in the public guardian budget, and that's due to a transfer of those duties from the district attorney to the health and human service budget. 2.3 FTE increase in public health, 1 in mental health, decrease of 1/4 in alcohol and drug, decrease of 1.35 in economic development, and that corresponds to the 1 increase in planning and building. 1.5 in tobacco control, 4.5 in social service administration.
now those two right there,
Okay.
are they pluses or minuses?
With the tobacco control,
Yeah,
those are increases.
I can address those if you
and an
like.
increase in 4.5 in social services?
Yes.
I can address those if you like.
I was just curious on what if they would
Okay.
increase or decrease.
So the 1.5 in tobacco ed is because we've always had tobacco ed on a contract. And darn, Laura Roberts wants to retire, and so now we're bringing it back in. So now that's the number of positions she always had in that program, and now we're bringing that program in-house, and so we have to hire some people to staff it up. The 4.5 in social services, there is a position, senior account clerk for the adult services unit, anticipating taking on the public administrator duties during the year, which we've talked about for a couple of years. And then there are 3 full-time drivers, because under the Affordable Care Act, we're having a hard time keeping our drivers at that 28 hours, and so we saw it as the easiest way to avoid any problems is just go ahead and make them full-time. And let me see, there's a couple of other positions that we're doing. One is, my sheet here. I got my notes on it. And one is we're asking to unfreeze the staff analyst position because in child welfare we need a staff analyst to keep up with all the reports that have to go to the state with all the new requirements. And then there's a 0.5 position, the Maria Carlomagno Bryce's old position was still in there as director. And what we really need is a program manager, so we're asking for another 0.5. We're going to downgrade from a director to program manager position in the public assistance side. Does that answer your question, Mr. Alba?
Good enough, thank you.
Thank you, Mel.
Okay, and so we have a 0.55 increase in the local transportation fund and a 1 FTE increase in probation, and a half FTE increase in the juvenile hall.
Those are increases?
Yes. In addition to the recommended changes to the allocated positions, the board should note that there were other requests that are not being recommended, and those include 1 associate appraiser in the assessor's office, 1 code enforcement officer in the planning and building department, and 1 FTE deputy DA and 1 FTE investigator that are not being recommended. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of discussion about that, and maybe if we could hold off until I get through the memo, when we come back to the various departments, we could go into that detail. The Honey Lake Valley Recreation Authority, their budget includes contributions in the amount of $200,000 for the annual contribution pursuant to the current JPA agreement. It also includes $1.1 million for one-time contribution to the Joint Powers Authority to capitalize the construction of the swimming pool. That expenditure will be made after the JPA agreement is approved by this board. The economic development, we've had some changes over the year. At the direction of the board, we've moved the CDBG function to Health and Social Services under the direction of Melody. By virtue of doing that, we transferred the FTEs into that budget. The board will recall that we have had a significant deficit in the Economic Development Fund 112 for the last few years. We're recommending a way of remedying that by transferring $181,000 from Fund 110 into the 112 fund. Sorry, 181 and then 291 to facilitate that transfer. What the 181 represents is, and Supervisor Chapman's probably the only one that will remember that, when Health and Human Services, or Health and Human Services at the time moved away from being funded directly from the general fund into its own funding source. The county contributed an amount of money to that fund to provide for some cash flow for the startup period. And this was back, Malcolm helped me, back in the 80s.
It was in 1983 when we created. Prior to that time, you had the health department here and socials. Everybody had their own little silo. And so they created, what was the guy's name? Shoot.
That was before my time. I was in Stanislaus then.
But anyway, the guy that was the administrator was kind of like the Kevin Winnell of the 80s versus of the 2000s. And so anyway, they came in. We were one of the first rural counties to create a health and social services as a unified administrative unit. And it was designed to, they sold the hospital, and that got out of the picture. They took everything else and merged it together. So kind of basically up front, I didn't realize it was a loan. I thought they just, took the money for the general fund money, but I guess that's how, because we didn't have an administrator back then, a county administrator, so that was...
I'm not sure, and we've tried to kind of figure out exactly what the thought process was without a great deal of success, but we are confident that general fund money was transferred into
it was all general fund money back then. There were none of these little funds and stuff, and the idea was to try to at least quantify what, kind of similar to what we did with public safety, because public safety is general fund, and health and social services is general fund. Bottom line, if there has to be any backfill, it's going to be the general fund that backs up those funds. But in order to be able to quantify, what's public safety, what's health and social services, and what's general services, it was really kind of designed to make it more manageable so we could quantify what it is. So yeah, we could wipe out all the other funds and all the other activities and give it to a particular department. I mean, we could give all the money to the DA, so we don't even have to have a health and social services. We'll just wipe it out and transfer it. Same thing like with the sheriff or whatever. So that was the purpose of these funds, to do that. So that's how they started it up. So,
and being the case, I feel it's appropriate, since the Health and Social Service Fund is very healthy now, to transfer it back.
Well, yeah, if we use general funds to get started, if we don't say anything, they'd probably just consider the state health and social services. No, that money's ours. If you let it sit
That's
there.
how we've been considering it.
I tried to negotiate.
No, we've been saving it. Now we're giving it back.
I tried and lost the battle to negotiate interest payment on that amount of money since 1983.
Well, it's kind of like the state with the negative flow thing. shortchanged us $18 million over the last 30 years, so we ought to get something back.
So,
We're still on track.
and the other $291,000 that will be required to bring Fund 112 to zero is proposed to be taken out of the Health and Social Service Fund.
So what's the rationale for putting it into economic development?
The overriding rationale is that we have this negative fund of about $500,000 that's accumulated over the last several years, maybe in excess of 10 years.
Is that the leftover from the Vitati affair?
This was a combination of a lot of things. Local reuse authority, failed CDBG loans, administration.
That's the Vitati affair.
Yeah, personnel costs and other administrative costs.
So why can't we just take that $181,000 and give it to the sheriff or DEA or one of the other departments?
We could, but that would unfortunately result in a continued negative fund balance in the economic development.
Well, it hasn't seemed to bother anybody until now.
We're trying to fix it.
Well, it's been bothering me.
Obviously. So.
Well, and Yvonne Smith said, we don't have red ink on ours. Get that off of here.
Yeah. When we transferred the fund to the Health and Social Service Department, they got really excited.
Oh, so that's the genesis there. Well, good for you, Bob.
I share their concern. Okay, so moving on to family resource centers. In the past, the county, or last year at least, the county has included $10,000 per family resource center in the budget in support of their efforts from tobacco settlement funds. And I recommended that. In addition to that, there was a request from the family resource centers for another $20,000 each or $60,000. Through discussions at the budget committee meeting, my recommendation is that we allocate another $10,000 each, totaling $30,000 from the general fund to be made available if and when those family resources centers provide matching funds to that. And that was the discussion at the budget committee meeting, was that it would be beneficial to make sure that there's buy-in of the communities and therefore the matching amount. We do need to discuss what we will consider matching funds if the board's inclined to approve that. Next item is the control boards and some other capital improvements at criminal justice facilities. I've included funding for jail improvements in the criminal justice facility construction fund in the amount of $400,000. That is primarily could be used for any of the capital items that we're planning there, the control boards and the telephone system. In order to facilitate this, I'm recommending a transfer from the courthouse construction fund to the criminal justice facility construction fund in the amount of $400,000. And just as kind of a side note on that courthouse construction fund, we need some more research on that before we actually make these transfers, but I'm relatively confident that they are appropriate. We don't have a court facility any longer as we did back prior to 2009. Prior to 2009, funds came into the courthouse construction fund for the courthouse. In theory, Lassen County and LA County had special legislation adopted that allowed those two counties to transfer money from their courthouse construction fund to their criminal justice facility construction fund to have a broader use of the money, so they could be used for juvenile halls, jails, etc. It's my belief now that the courthouse construction fund is no longer necessary since the courts have taken over responsibility for their facilities, and that we should probably be taking the deposits, the fine revenue that are currently going into that fund, they should be going to the Criminal Justice Facility Fund. That's why I'm recommending the transfer from the Courthouse Construction Fund to the Criminal Justice Facility Fund. That will leave a balance in that Courthouse Construction Fund of a little over $300,000. Okay. So in addition to those capital items, there are other capital projects budgeted in the ACO fund, the 119 fund of $320,000. We've budgeted, again, a return of funds from Trindle into each fund, and each fund that pays into that through the premiums. And what the return of funds is annually at Trindle, we at Trindle calculate based on our liability exposure whether or not we are overfunded for our purposes of insurance, and if we're overfunded, which we have been in the last several years, we draw down that money and only leave on deposit with Trindle that which we expect to expend in claims. And we can explore that further if the board wants. This applies only to the property and liability portion of the premium, not the workman's comp premium. The total amount of that is about $200,000. And I think the general fund expected return is a little over $30,000. Okay, county local revenue fund or local community corrections fund. 300 is budgeted to go into the debt service fund. This is a way of properly accounting for the portion of the 2950 Riverside Drive property that we anticipate to use for the day reporting center, which is a function of the Community Corrections Partnership. They will be occupying a part of that building in the probation area. And the $300,000 is pretty much a placeholder until we calculate square footage and all those other costs to determine what exactly that is. But there's that money available for their contribution to that purchase of that money. I'm recommending a transfer from tobacco settlement funds of $192 to the debt service fund, which is $170. This is to partially finance the current year payment on the debt that we issued this year for the swimming pool and the building. I've included $114,000 or $115,000 to support the fair from the general fund. This is slightly more than last year. Last year, the fair had a substantial beginning balance that allowed a reduction in the general fund contribution, and now it's back up to 114. So this is pretty much a stable level, but it's worth noting. As last year, I've recommended to budget a contingency in the amount of $400,000 out of the general reserve budget, funded budget unit, rather than out of the general fund. Okay. So consistent with my memo, I recommend the board receive public comment. If they're so inclined, adopt the attached resolution or change it and adopt it consistent with code. But I think that it would probably be worth, I don't know how the board would like to do it, but I know there's questions with district attorney's office that the board would like to address. There's issues with the assessor's office, perhaps probation and others. We can take it however the board would like. Julie, I may defer to Julie if I've missed anything that you'd like to.
You didn't touch everything.
I just started off on the stuff with the district attorney. During the budget session, it was asked to request the amount of $240,000 salaries and benefits and one-time increase of $56,500 to purchase education management system. What of that is in the budget?
I'm sorry.
Is any of that the increase in the budget?
I think, let me get to that.
I was actually,
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. I was
No,
on
you're
my
fine.
way walking up here and
stay right there, you're good.
okay.
My question is actually to.
Right, what did we include, I think is
Okay.
what you're.
Thank you.
What Stacy and Chris asked for,
Okay.
what is included in your budget?
Let me get to, and there are a couple of budgets. We've got the victim witness budget, which is the 108.
Let me ask you another question. Wait a minute. The 240,000, that was for two new jobs?
That was for, I believe, if I'm correct, that was for the deputy district attorney and the investigator that are currently not being recommended in the budget.
Would you like me to just go through the request? And Stacy, please correct me if I'm wrong, because there was an original, I know you won't hesitate. There was an original budget request, and there was an amended budget request, and then there's my recommendation. So if it gets a little confusing.
It's been very confusing because this is the first time I've done this without an assistant, and it's being my first time, it's also the first time that I've ever had to prepare a budget request with any kind of increase in it. So it's a new process, I think. Well, it is a new process for me. So.
Right.
And then we were talking about new FTEs in different departments. It said there was nothing through the DA's office.
Well, if you want to look back at my memo, so the original, the revised request was for, I think, 3/10 of a position in
Yes.
victim witness. And for one deputy district attorney in the district attorney's budget, not the victim witness budget, and one investigator in the district attorney's budget, the 130, 433 budget. I'm sorry, the 130, 431 budget.
That's correct.
So, yes. So if you go to tab 11 in your binders.
You have to jump around and put all this together.
Yeah. Well, all the district attorney ones are together.
You got a whole book, Stacy.
I'm sorry.
So if you look at the district attorney victim witness budget, which is the first district attorney, or the second page in that tab 11, the first district attorney budget that we wanted to discuss, there was a requested increase of 0.4 of a position, or 0.39 increase in that budget from 1.4 to 1.8, and maybe Stacy, you can help me on the classification of that position. Is that
There are two, now in victim witness, there are going to be two positions. The program coordinator was Denise Stelzer. That was, and her position was divided between the victim witness program and the public safety.
right?
So what we've done is, because of issues that we've had with the grant, we've decided to make that position. We've got one person in victim witness now who's going to be the accountable person for victim witness.
You did not have anybody there before.
Correct. We had one victim witness advocate, and now what we have is a one victim witness advocate who's also acting as a coordinator, or victim witness grant coordinator. And then we've also increased that point by 0.8 because there was an increase in the grant. So we are able to hire. We're asking for an increase in 0.8 there, so that we can have another victim witness advocate to assist with our current victim witness advocate, because she's taking over all of the grant documentation for the program.
And so we've got, and I think what could prove to be a little confusing is we've got fractions of employees in different counties.
Yes, in that particular instance, we've got Denise, who was split between the two, that I'm trying to make one full-time position in victim witness, and then the other full-time position, in public safety.
Right. And so in the victim witness budget, we've got that full-time position request, and another 0.8 of a position and that position escapes me as well, the classification.
Of the other victim witness position?
The other 0.8. We've got the one full-time, one
We've got
FTE.
one full-time, and the part-time, the .8, it's also a victim witness coordinator, but it's a part-time position because that's what the grant would cover, basically. So that there's nothing coming out of the general fund on the victim witness side.
So that takes that budget from a 1.41 FTE last year to a 1.8 FTE this year.
That's correct.
And that's my recommendation. I think we're in agreement
Yes,
on that.
and you made the recommendation with respect to the full-time position in public safety for a program coordinator. At this point in time, what